This is Eric with Astrology for Awakening, and we're looking at the full moon in Pisces, about 28 degrees Pisces. And the theme today is disillusionment, and sacred intoxication. The full moon in Pisces always brings with it this mood, this mystical mood of openness, of poetic perception, a kind of opportunity to dissolve boundaries in a way that can open the mind to the sacred dimensions of existence, and potentially or maybe can cloud or mist the mind in a self-deceptive cloud of inebriation. So in this practice of attuning to the planetary archetypes and energies as doorways, as dharma doors to awakening, we want to explore how to ride the waves of this Neptunian full moon in a way that brings us into a deeper communion with the sacred dimensions. And it reminds me of the surfers who live around us here in Encinitas, California, and the way that they tune in to the waves of Mother Ocean. Because Mother Ocean is Neptune and is Pisces, and with this full moon, there's a powerful surf, there's a powerful swell. The full moon is still in proximity to Neptune, which brings and augments and accentuates the power of this particular possibility to surf the waves of awakening, to stay balanced, but also to respect, to honor, and surrender to that energy in a way that opens us up to the sacred dimension. So this is the theme, because there's a kind of intoxication that is spoken of in the wisdom traditions, an intoxication that is an ecstatic state, that takes the devotee, that takes the meditator, the mystic, and lifts them out of themselves, in a sense, lifts really the heaviness and dissolves the fixations of the conditioned identity, which is this sense of expansion then, and it opens us to a revelation of the depths. A modern, beautiful Sufi master named Kabir Helmenski, in his translations of Rumi and Hafez, he talks about this. He calls it the sobriety that surpasses intoxication. As we move into the mystical path, as we begin to dissolve away the conditioned identity, we open to bliss. And there are stages in that bliss. The bliss is the wine of the mystic, the wine of the Sufi, the intoxication that calls us deeper and deeper into the communion and allows us to disillusion ourselves of the false self identities. But this intoxication is a form of sobriety, a form of awakening, of clarity. It is not a spacing out. It is not a losing of orientation to any world. It is rather the opening and the communion and the discovery of the wine of the Ananda, the bliss energy that is present, infused in all of creation. And as we become sober in this Piscean way, sober by attuning to the deeper bliss, we discover and we are revealed unto us the ways that we are addicted, the way that we are intoxicated by our conditioning, the way we are addicted to self-protective strategies. And this is symbolized in this opposition of sun and moon, the moon being the Pisces full moon opposite Virgo, symbolizing in a sense that it reveals to us those particular Virgonian strategies of self-improvement, those Virgonian strategies of perfectionism that are actually ways of keeping us confined and protected from the blessing of those waves of bliss. In Hafiz, the great Sufi poet, translations by Richard Laguialin, he is in a versified kind of translation. He says, Hafiz, always speaking in the first person, says, "Well, Hafiz, life is a riddle. Give it up. There is no answer to it but this cup. This cup is the cup that holds, that is the vessel that receives the wine of Ananda, Anandic bliss, the wine of that sobriety, the wine of the intoxication beyond conditioning. And the riddle of life, the riddle of, in a sense, freeing ourselves from ourselves. This is the riddle of our existence. You know, how do we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps? It's a terrible image. You can't. But this is the Virgonian symbol of self-perfection, of optimization, of high performance, of endless improvement. That is Virgo's stock and trade, and trying to untangle the riddle of self. But the problem with all of these strategies, and it's not about Virgos, we all have this element of our being, is that strategies for self-perfection are arising from a sense of incompleteness or imperfection. The strategies for when they are arising from, when these efforts to complete the self are coming from an incomplete self-sense, these are strategies that are infused with and generated by that incompleteness. They're all conceived from the perspective of incompleteness. And so fundamentally, they are expressions of incompleteness, regardless of what they're called. And we are intoxicated by this endless effort to free ourselves. But Pisces offers a way out. It offers one of the 12 ways out. And this is the way through surrender. Through surrender. Not hopeless giving up, but lovingly releasing ourselves, compassionately releasing ourselves from the struggle of self-perfection. And this wisdom of Pisces full moon is echoed in the 12-step programs when they speak of the image of powerlessness. It's the surfer in the ocean who recognizes, I am powerless against Mother Ocean, but I can say yes to the swell. And in that way, I can enjoy the bliss of being carried by a power greater than myself, carried forward in a beauty greater than I can imagine. It reminds me of a story from the life of C.G. Jung, one of my great heroes, one of the great mystics of the modern era. And he had a lot to do with the inspiration behind the 12-step movement. He had a patient named Roland Hazard, who was both an investment banker and a senator, who came to Jung in desperation because of his drinking problem, his alcoholism. And he saw Jung for a series of months, and during that time he stopped drinking, but then he relapsed, and he was brought back by his family to Jung. And Jung told him, basically, that the case was hopeless. So this is this giving up of the conditioned identity's hope for self-improvement in order to surrender. And he said that he needed, in the language of the day, a religious conversion. And this is documented in Bill Wilson's writings, who wrote in a letter to Jung the following. He says, "You frankly told him of his hopelessness. So as far as further medical or psychiatric treatment might be concerned, this candid and humble a statement of yours was beyond the doubt the first foundation stone upon which our society has been built." And this is the symbol of this full moon. All the self-generated, conditioned self-strategies for freedom and for self-perfection, ultimately, when they are arising out of that very sense of despair or that very identification with incompleteness, they don't work. Something else. Jung told the gentleman that conversion experiences were rare, and he recommended to this gentleman that he place yourself in a religious atmosphere and hope for the best. So give up all this hope for the strategies, but open yourself up into an atmosphere. And that's a very Piscean word. Enter into an atmosphere. An atmosphere is kind of invisible. It's infused with these qualities. Enter into a mood, an openness, in a bhavana, a feeling of cultivating awakening, a feeling of cultivating surrender, a feeling of letting the ocean of existence cleanse you. Jung didn't say which particular form or symbol to go for. He wrote back to Bill Wilson, his craving for alcohol, the patient's craving for alcohol, was the equivalent on a lower level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, for the union with God. And that is what the full moon in Pisces is offering. It's like, yes, we want that union is available through this surrendering, and all the other forms of intoxication are actually forms of self-fragmentation and distraction from that purely integrative blessing that comes when we surrender into the vastness of all that is, which is all that we are as well. And it is available always, as the Pisces moon points out, here, now, in this moment, to let go into that fundamental completeness, which is the divine presence. That divine presence is in the midst of all. It is infused in all. And of course, it is beyond every revelation, which is endlessly opening into the ocean of bliss. Rumi's great teacher, Shams Tabriz, speaks of this kind of lucidity that the sobriety beyond intoxication brings. And he says, when we're entering into this practice, when we're entering into this communion, there is no place for the fantasy of angels, and much less there is no place for the fantasy of the devil. So whether we are feeling like we're the most amazing thing in the world or we're feeling like we're the worst thing in the world, there's no place for these conditioned thoughts, for these fantasies. Self-aggrandizement or self-deprecation, those are all thoughts and conditions. There's no place for them. They're fantasies to be washed away in the ocean of being. So this is the invitation of the full moon in Pisces. It's an invitation, and accepting it is disillusioning all of these illusions that we've held onto, that have been our inappropriate life rafts, that have been the flotsam and jetsam of our conditioning, that have kept us afloat in the ocean of existence. They're not going to help us surf and become co-creative artists with the divine energy. So Pisces without judgment, the Pisces full moon without any self-condemnation, says it's time to let go. In a sense, there's a poignancy, but it's a compassionate poignancy when we recognize the depths of our self-deception, and we recognize the even deeper and endless availability of blessing that the disillusionment offers us here and now.